Hello everyone, Waddling Duck here to explain a hidden ability that all spearmen have in Age of Empires 4. A lot of people seem vaguely aware that spearmen can brace for impact against incoming cavalry. There's a loading screen tip that vaguely references spearmen being able to counter cavalry charges, but aside from that, it is a completely hidden mechanic. I have tested the mechanics so that you can use it properly and know exactly how it works and when it is triggered. If you give a spearman the command to stand ground, you can see them visually lower themselves into a squat and aim their spears directly forward. This is in fact their hidden bracing ability. However, you do not need to use the stand ground command to achieve it, and in many scenarios, stand ground is not the optimal way to use it. Before we get into how to use it, I'll first go over what it does. When a cavalry unit charges into a spearman that is bracing, the charge is completely negated, dealing no damage. It also stuns and roots the cavalry. In most cases, the distinction between stun and root will be meaningless, but there is potential for optimizing your microplay using this distinction, which I will cover later in this video. Finally, sometimes bracing will count as a hit from the spearman, but sometimes it doesn't. This is clearly buggy, and it almost always deals no damage. There are three distinct animation phases while brace plays out. The first phase begins when the cavalry unit hits the brace. During this animation, both units are locked in place and cannot move or attack. The exact timing on this varied by about half a second, and I got values ranging from 0.6 to 1.2 seconds. The second phase has the knight stunned while the spearman is free to move and attack. Again, I was getting a range of values, but the average time for a spearman to land a hit on the cavalry was 1.35 seconds after the brace hit. The cavalry unit generally became unstunned at 2 seconds after the brace. The third phase has the knight able to attack but unable to move. This one was very consistent when measured from the brace hit, with the root wearing off between 3.1 and 3.3 seconds after the hit in every test I performed. As discussed later, generally this extra root is irrelevant. The ability to negate a charge and also stun cavalry for 2 seconds seems incredibly strong. In a 1v1, the spearman will get about 1.5 free hits. However, other units supporting the spearman are not animation locked during the brace and get the full 2 seconds to attack. There are a few other scenarios that I tested as well. I did specifically test the Royal Knight's charge. In negating the charge with brace, the Royal Knight's passive ability does not trigger, and they do not gain their buff for additional damage. I also tested what happens if a group of cavalry charges a single spearman. Every charging unit will be locked in the first phase animation and has their charge negated. However, only a single unit will be locked in the second and third phases. This means that a single spearman has the potential to negate the charge damage and buffs for an entire group of Royal Knights, despite only a single knight being stunned. Now we get into how to trigger the brace ability. The easiest way to use a spearman's brace is to simply do nothing. If you keep the spearman idle, it will automatically detect incoming cavalry charges, redirection himself to face it, and brace for impact. The big caveat with this is that the spearman has to be completely idle. He cannot be walking or attack moving. There's potential for the opponent to bait your spearman out to get him moving, and then send in a charge afterward. However, it seems like usually the idle spearman that has been baited in this manner will still in fact automatically brace for a subsequent charge. I believe that the trigger here is whether or not the spearman has actually started attacking a unit, or if he is merely chasing after one. In this way, being baited to chase operates differently than manual commands, as a spearman that is moving or attack moving to your command will not brace under any circumstances. Next, we have the stand ground version of bracing. You do not run the risk of being baited out of position, but there are several drawbacks to using stand ground. First, orientation matters if stand ground is used, while it does not matter if the spearman is idle. An attack from directly behind an idle spearman will have the spearman reposition to brace, while an attack directly behind a stand ground spearman will have the charge hit the spearman in the back. Next, the range of the brace ability exceeds the range of melee attacks. If you have stand ground selected, the spearman will simply stand idle for the entirety of the stun and root duration. If you left the spearman idle, the spearman will automatically take a step forward after the brace animation finishes and get a hit off on the cavalry unit before the stun wears off. This is also where I learned that there is a distinction between stun and root. If a unit is in melee range, the knight remains stunned for 2 seconds. If there's not any unit in melee range, the knight cannot move until 1 more second later. While I think that this will rarely be practical, it does deserve mention. In the case of it being only spearmen against cavalry, you will definitely want to get that extra hit off on the cavalry during the stun. However, if you have a small front line of spearmen in front of a large mass of ranged units, you might actually want the spearmen to stay out of range of the knight for that extra second, as the damage from the spearmen itself may be negligible and you might just be taking unnecessary damage. There are a few minor visual bugs that I'll mention here. While stunned and rooted, the knight can pivot in place based on its current movement command. In some of the clips I've shown in this video, you will see that the knight is stunned facing away from the spearman. This is because I ordered it to retreat the moment the charge hit the brace. Also, having a charge negated by the brace ability does put the charge on cooldown. However, the visuals for the lance are not replaced by visuals for the sword until the knight is both issued an attack command and is able to attack. This can lead to confusing situations where you have retreated, but it still shows a lance despite the charge being on cooldown. Also interesting, but the brace ability works against all cavalry charges, and not just charges that deal extra damage. This means that horsemen, which have a charge animation that does not deal any extra damage, can still have their first hit negated and suffer from a stun. After learning this, I also tested melee infantry, since melee infantry also have a charge animation which increases their move speed. Brace did not work against the infantry, but now we know that for certain. I have one final mechanic worth noting, this time from the viewpoint of the cavalry unit. If you manually move the cavalry close to the spearmen without an attack move, you can get inside of the minimum charge radius. If you do this, you may then issue an attack order, and they will use their standard melee attack without charging, thus bypassing the brace mechanic and not getting stunned. The last thing we need right now is a tactic to further strengthen feudal age knights, but now we know it'll just be that much tougher to repel properly microed knights. Thank you all for watching, and I hope that you learned something new in this video. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe so that you don't miss out on more to come.